In a high-stakes congressional showdown, Jasmine Crockett takes aim at Ron DeSantis, accusing him of turning 82,000 COVID deaths into a political calculation. As the chamber erupts and the nation watches, she rips the mask off a legacy built on denial and spin. This isn't just about Florida. It's about how far one man went to chase power while bodies piled up. When a governor gambles with human lives, who holds him accountable? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the dim congressional lights, silence gripped the room like a chokehold. Ron DeSantis sat stiff, arms crossed, flanked by aides who avoided eye contact. The air was thick. This wasn't just a hearing. It was an autopsy of leadership. The topic, how Florida responded to COVID-19. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, voice sharp as a blade. Tens of thousands died in Florida, and instead of saving lives, you played politics with their breath. DeSantis scoffed, voice cold. Florida chose freedom over lockdowns. People deserve to live, not hide. Chairs creaked. Pens froze. No one moved. Jasmine didn't blink. You didn't choose freedom. You gambled with lives like they were polling numbers. The room trembled, not from sound, but from the weight of truth. DeSantis stared ahead, lips tightening. He expected fire. He got precision. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. The battle had begun. The silence didn't last long. Jasmine wasn't done. She came to make numbers bleed. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Her hand moved with eerie precision as she slid a printed CDC report across the polished wood, letting it land between the microphones like a thrown gauntlet. Her voice was calm, but every syllable cracked like glass under pressure. According to the Centers for Disease Control, she said, her gaze slicing across the chamber, Florida was among the top states in COVID-19 fatalities in 2020 and 2021. A sharp pause. Top, not middle, not average. Top, her words echoed like gunshots in a courtroom. She leaned forward slowly, like a prosecutor before the kill. Do you deny the number, Governor? She asked, her voice suddenly sharp. 82,000 dead. Do you deny that? The room sucked in air. The impact of that number hit like a punch to the chest. Ron DeSantis didn't answer immediately. He shifted in his seat, straightened his cuffs with mechanical detachment, then offered a smirk that barely reached his eyes. That number's been inflated by the media, he said coolly. You know it. I know it. They needed a villain, and Florida was the perfect headline. He leaned back like he'd scored a point, but no one was clapping. The chamber stirred, quietly, tensely. On the Republican side, a few heads nodded, unsure, as if following a rehearsed rhythm. One congressman muttered something under his breath, but on the Democratic side, faces tightened, jaws locked. A staffer froze mid-note. Someone else gripped the edge of their notepad as if holding back a storm. But Jasmine didn't flinch, because what she had next wasn't an opinion. It was proof. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she slowly reached into her binder, pulled out a folded document with a government seal, and laid it on the microphone like it was a loaded weapon. Her eyes never left DeSantis. This, she said, her tone controlled but electric, is an internal report from the Florida Department of Health. She let the silence thicken before continuing. And it contains a written directive that says, do not release the actual death count to avoid public panic. The words detonated. The chamber froze in place like time had stopped. No coughing, no scribbling. Just stunned faces turning toward one another, eyes wide, mouths slightly parted. A Republican senator dropped his pen without realizing. The chair leaned back slowly, eyebrows raised. It wasn't disbelief, it was dread. Jasmine slid the report closer to the edge, letting the entire room see the signature at the bottom. DeSantis jolted forward, face darkening. His voice came like a gunshot. You're making this up, he barked. You're bending facts, twisting reality. This is fiction, and you know it. His fist hit the table once, sharp, like a failed attempt to regain control. Cameras clicked again. Staffers blinked. Someone in the gallery gasped. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She simply tilted her head slightly, like a lioness watching her prey panic. This is a document from your own health department, she replied, deadly calm. It didn't come from a journalist. It didn't come from a leak. It came from inside your house. She paused, then added, so if you have a problem with the truth, take it up with the people who work for you. The blow landed harder than anything he'd shouted. DeSantis opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes scanned the table, then the chair, then the silent faces around him. Nobody coming to his rescue. This wasn't a debate. It was an exposure. And in that instant, the lie didn't just unravel, it collapsed. And then, just when the tension reached a breaking point, a man stood up, and the oxygen seemed to vanish from the room. He wore a dark gray suit, not flashy, not loud, just serious. His ID badge read Dr. Alan Mercer, Miami General Hospital. He didn't look like a politician. He didn't speak like one either. No drama, no flourishes, just facts. He stood tall, voice even, and said the one sentence that shattered every pretense in the chamber. We were instructed to alter the cause of death on official records. For a moment, it didn't register. People heard it, but their minds took an extra second to catch up. Then chairs stiffened, heads turned, aides froze mid-sentence. Jasmine Crockett didn't move, but her eyes sharpened like a blade being unsheathed. The rest of the room, paralyzed. It was as if someone had fired a gun, but only the truth had left a wound. Dr. Mercer looked directly at the committee, his hands trembling only slightly as he gripped the statement. Many patients who died from COVID-19, he continued, were recorded as dying from underlying conditions. Diabetes, heart disease, chronic respiratory failure, anything but COVID. He paused, not to dramatize, but to breathe. I watched nurses sob as they filled out death certificates that didn't tell the truth. We knew what was happening. We were told not to ask. Someone in the second row audibly exhaled, then covered their mouth as if ashamed of letting sound slip through. He flipped the page in his folder, revealing an anonymized case list. Patient 143, 68 years old, tested positive, developed respiratory failure, died within 48 hours. Cause of death on record, hypertension. Patient 214, 53 years old, died on a ventilator after COVID complications. Cause of death recorded as pre-existing asthma. He looked up. We buried the truth with them. And then, nothing. No coughs, no pen clicks, not even a shuffle of feet. One Republican congressman dropped his gaze and stared at the floor. Another bit his lip. The silence wasn't respectful. It was horrified. One Democratic senator mouthed the word Jesus under her breath, eyes wide. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The room had already shifted. Everyone knew it. Dr. Mercer added one final line. We weren't just fighting a virus. We were fighting an instruction to lie. The moment snapped. The chair gripped his gavel but didn't use it. Everyone looked to DeSantis. And for the first time since the hearing began, the man who walked in with confidence now sat utterly still, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. Neck stiff, eyes narrowed, not in defiance but in calculation. And then he forced a laugh. Too late. Too hollow. These statements are baseless, he said, wiping his forehead. There's no evidence to support them. But the chamber didn't move. No nods. No allies. Just the weight of what had just been said. On the record, under oath. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She had one more number, and this one came with faces. The overhead screen lit up with a harsh flash, then locked onto a single bar graph sourced directly from the CDC. Thick red bars stretched across the screen, towering over the faint gray lines representing national averages. A bold caption read, Elderly COVID-19 mortality rate by state, CDC 2021. Jasmine stepped aside, letting the image do its damage. This, she said clearly, is official CDC data. It shows that Florida had one of the highest death rates among seniors during the pandemic. Her voice didn't tremble. It cut. She turned to DeSantis, her tone turning razor sharp. They died alone, in silence, in locked rooms. And you called that freedom. The room didn't breathe. One senator's pen paused midair. A staffer gripped the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jasmine let the graph hang there like a gravestone. She didn't embellish it. She didn't need to. The numbers screamed for themselves. DeSantis's face twitched visibly. His calm mask cracked. With sudden fury, he slammed his hand on the desk. Thump! And leaned forward. We didn't lock down, he snapped. We kept our economy open, and Florida's recovery was faster than any other state. His voice grew louder, trembling at the edges. We trusted our people. We protected small businesses. We gave them a choice. But every sentence sounded more like a defense than a declaration. Jasmine didn't blink. She let him shout. Let him empty every justification like a man swinging in the dark. Then she leaned in, slow and cold. You traded the lives of our parents for your GDP. The words hit like a bullet. The graph behind her didn't change. The silence in the chamber turned violent. A Democrat 2 seats down dropped her gaze, visibly shaken. A Republican senator exhaled heavily and looked away. The numbers weren't abstract anymore. They were weighted. Jasmine stood still, but her presence grew larger with every breath DeSantis failed to take. You gambled with the most vulnerable people in this country and called it leadership. Her voice was still low, but now it echoed. DeSantis's face had gone pale. The sweat above his brow caught the light. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. Jasmine didn't let up. She gestured back at the screen. These aren't opinions, she said. This is CDC data, your own state's performance. That bar up there, that's not a statistic. That's thousands of funerals. No applause, no pushback, just silence. She turned slowly to face the full chamber. They weren't given a choice. They were given a death sentence, and the price was political bragging rights. The screen behind her flickered once, then held. The graph stayed frozen in place, a monument to what was lost. No one dared speak, not because they couldn't, but because they knew. Nothing they said would change what had already been shown. But if the CDC graph had cracked the chamber open, what Jasmine revealed next set it on fire. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if knowing the room wasn't ready for what was coming. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a printed email, stamped, dated, signed. With one smooth motion, she placed it beneath the overhead camera. The screen lit up behind her, and the words appeared in cold, damning black. We need to keep the death count low. Optics matter if he's going to be viable for a presidential run. Bradley Sutter, Senior Policy Advisor to Governor DeSantis. Sent, August 19th, 2021. The room didn't stir. It convulsed. Lawmakers jolted forward. Aides froze mid-keystroke. Reporters in the back row let out audible gasps as they read the name. Bradley Sutter, a longtime DeSantis insider and architect of his pandemic response. Phones buzzed. Folders dropped. 2 Republican senators exchanged sharp, wide-eyed glances. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't a rumor. It was written. And now it was public record. DeSantis's reaction was instant and feral. He shot up from his chair so fast it screeched against the floor. His skin flushed deep red. Hands braced on the table, he barked. That's out of context. This is a coordinated attack, a political ambush. His voice cracked on the word coordinated. The mask of calm he'd worn all day shattered in one blow. Before the shouting could spread, the chairman slammed his gavel with force. Order in the chamber! Order! The noise subsided, but the atmosphere remained electric. Too charged to breathe. The email still glowed behind Jasmine, seared into the chamber wall like graffiti carved into history. Every eye turned back to her. Jasmine stood tall, eyes locked on DeSantis. Her tone didn't rise, didn't waver. It was quiet but lethal. You didn't just play a political game, she said, her words slicing through the static. You played that game with human lives. The finality was suffocating. The silence wasn't passive. It was loaded. DeSantis didn't speak. He stared blankly, mouth half open, as if searching for a response that wouldn't come. Behind him, his aides sank lower in their seats. Bradley Sutter's name, his name, was still visible on the screen. The date, unshakable. The quote, indefensible. And no one in the room was willing to pretend otherwise. This wasn't a debate anymore. This wasn't rhetoric. This was evidence from inside his own circle, proving that the numbers on the charts weren't just casualties. They were strategies, sacrifices made to preserve a political future. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood still, like someone who knew exactly what she had just done. The chamber had witnessed not just a collapse, but an unmasking. This was the moment he fell, and the proof didn't come from an enemy. It came from his own desk. But Jasmine wasn't done. Numbers could be ignored, but names could haunt. She pulled out a thick folder with a red tag labeled "Deceased Verified." The weight of it was visible even before she opened it. She placed it on the table slowly, the sound of the paper hitting the wood echoing like a quiet verdict. Then, without raising her voice, she said, "This is a list of more than 200 people who died in Florida under your policies. Not theoretical lives, real names, real families." She opened to the first page. The room tensed. She looked directly at DeSantis as she read. Name, Gloria Reed, age 71. Cause of death, COVID-19 complications. Family denied visitation, died alone. She paused, not for effect, but for gravity. You could feel the chamber tighten. Then she turned the page. Name, Marcus Delgado, age 58, tested positive, placed on a ventilator. Death certificate says heart disease. Hospital records say otherwise. A whisper broke from the gallery. Someone wiped their eye in the second row. Jasmine didn't stop. Name, Lorraine Patel, age 76, lived alone in Palm Beach. Called 911 with shortness of breath. No beds available. Declared dead 42 minutes later. Labeled pre-existing asthma. The room fell into a vacuum. No coughs, no rustling, just stillness, and the piercing ring of reality. She didn't need to read all 200. 2 names was enough to open the wound. 3 was enough to make it bleed. The rest sat unspoken, but not unseen. The folder stayed open like a casket. The silence that followed was suffocating. Not respectful, not procedural, personal. A Democratic senator looked down, biting his lip. A staffer in the corner dropped her pen but didn't bother to pick it up. Another representative, once staunchly aligned with DeSantis, bowed his head and didn't raise it again. The screen behind Jasmine remained blank, but the air was crowded with ghosts. And DeSantis, still, frozen, a portrait of defeat in slow motion. His jaw was tight, his eyes darted. Not at Jasmine, not at the names, but somewhere far beyond the room, as if searching for a way out that no longer existed. His fingers were pressed together, knuckles white, but no one sat close enough to hide him anymore. His aides looked down. No one reached for his mic. He was alone. Jasmine closed the folder carefully. Then she looked up and said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than DeSantis's opening statement, louder than his outrage, louder than his defense. Because these weren't numbers. These weren't votes or talking points. These were people. And with every name she read, every page she turned, every word she spoke, the chamber turned further against him, not by politics, but by grief. He didn't just lose control, he lost the room. And it wasn't Jasmine who took it from him. It was the dead. The names had fallen like thunder, and when the echoes finally faded, DeSantis tried to speak through the wreckage. He straightened in his seat, but there was no fire left behind his eyes. His voice cracked slightly as he clung to the only phrase he had left. Florida did the best it could, he said almost as a whisper. Then again, louder this time, but not stronger. Florida did the best it could. He repeated it like a shield, as if saying it enough times might erase what had already been spoken. But it didn't. The room didn't respond. No movement, no reactions. Not even his allies came to his rescue. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a building already burned down. One Republican lawmaker looked away. Another leaned back, arms crossed, face unreadable. The energy had left his side like a tide retreating after a storm, and it wasn't coming back. Jasmine leaned forward slowly, elbows on the table, never taking her eyes off him. Her voice was quiet, but in that silence it hit like a gunshot. If your best still let thousands die, then your best was betrayal. The room froze. No one coughed. No one adjusted their chair. The hearing chamber became something else, heavier, darker. A single phrase had hollowed it out. One aide in the back closed her laptop without looking up. Another dabbed at his face with a shaking hand. Jasmine's words didn't echo. They sank. DeSantis didn't blink. But something in him broke. His hands, once gripping the desk with authority, now trembled ever so slightly. His mouth opened again, but the words got stuck behind clenched teeth. For a man who had spoken with such force hours earlier, he now sat in the ruins of that voice. Whatever certainty he walked in with was gone. No one jumped to fill the silence. Not the chairman, not the aides, not even the press, who for once didn't type. The cameras kept rolling, but it felt like they were documenting something far deeper than politics. It wasn't a pause, it was a reckoning. And DeSantis was sitting in the center of it, alone. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply leaned back, her work complete. For now. She had stripped away every defense, not with volume, but with facts. Not with insults, but with names. And now DeSantis had nothing left but a phrase no one believed anymore. Florida did the best it could, but even he seemed to realize it wasn't enough. He looked down, not at notes, not at allies, at nothing, just down, and the chamber followed. Not because they agreed, but because the silence said what no voice dared to. It's over. This was the moment power didn't collapse. It surrendered, not to noise, but to stillness, not to argument, but to truth. And in that silence, Jasmine didn't just win a debate. She took the room, and he never got it back. The silence had broken him, but what came next would bury the lie for good. The chairman adjusted his mic, voice low but firm. He didn't look at DeSantis. He didn't have to. The entire room knew what was coming. He tapped the gavel once, just once, and said the words that would redefine everything. Given the testimony and evidence presented here today, this committee is initiating a full federal investigation into the COVID-19 response policies implemented by the state of Florida. No theatrics. No hesitation, just a single irreversible sentence. A ripple swept through the chamber. Audible, visible. Some gasped, some nodded, but no one was surprised. The writing had been on the wall since Jasmine opened her folder. A few Republican lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats but didn't object. One cleared his throat as if preparing to protest, then didn't. What came instead were a few scattered mutterings. Outrageous. Politically motivated. This is excessive. But those were just flickers. Weak, tired echoes of resistance in a room that had already turned. Jasmine didn't blink. She kept her gaze steady, trained forward like a sniper who had already taken the shot. She had presented the facts, the names, the email, and now the system itself was moving. The room wasn't hers, but the momentum was. Her presence still anchored the air. All in favor? The chairman asked, his voice hardening. A chorus of ayes rang out, sharp, direct, final. Opposed? 3 voices, maybe 4. Scattered. Weak. No applause followed. No statements made. Just silence and ink settling into history. DeSantis sat frozen, his spine no longer rigid but sagging under the weight of reality. The man who had entered with fire, who had shouted, deflected, barked, was now quiet. He didn't reach for his microphone. He didn't rise in protest. He bowed his head, and that was louder than anything he could have said. His hands clasped together on the table, but there was no tension in his grip, just exhaustion. His shoulders rose and fell in a slow, tired rhythm, as if even his breath had surrendered. The camera zoomed slightly, not to shame, but to capture. This wasn't political theater anymore. This was a reckoning, frame by frame. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave him. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat. But the fire was still there, behind her stare, behind the stillness in her chest. It wasn't about ego. It was about accountability. She had come for answers, and she had left no room for doubt. He had failed, and the system, at last, was ready to say it out loud. She exhaled once, slowly, then took her seat. The wood of the chair creaked slightly beneath her, not with fatigue, but with purpose. Her eyes never drifted to the floor. They remained up, locked on the front of the chamber, watching, waiting, as if daring the world to blink first. Across the room, some lawmakers avoided her gaze. Others looked at her with something far deeper than respect. It was fear, but not of her. Fear of what it meant to have the truth spoken in full view of the nation and not be able to stop it. The chairman continued outlining procedures, deadlines, formalities. But they were just formalities now. The real moment had passed. The knife had been twisted, and now came the institutional bleed. What began as a hearing had become a transformation. The truth had walked in with Jasmine and walked out with the room. One lawmaker leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "This changes everything." The colleague nodded silently. Another scribbled the word investigation on the corner of his notepad, underlined it twice, and closed the folder with finality. DeSantis still hadn't looked up. He stared down at his hands like they belonged to someone else. His face, once taut with calculation, now looked years older. He had always relied on control, controlling the narrative, the optics, the spin. But there's nothing to spin when the silence devours the stage. There's nothing to say when the chamber itself says it louder than you ever could. Jasmine sat still, but her presence, her voice, still rang in the ears of everyone in that room. If your best still let thousands die, then your best was betrayal. You didn't just play a political game. You played that game with human lives. She had spoken those words less than 10 minutes ago, and yet they now sat etched into the foundation of the hearing, impossible to ignore. The charts had proven it, the witness had confirmed it, the email had sealed it. Now the law was moving. The investigation was not a warning, it was a beginning, and it had started not with a bang, but with a woman who refused to look away. Jasmine Crockett didn't have to raise her voice to be heard. She didn't have to shout to be feared. She had facts. She had fire. And now she had forced the system to act. Behind her, aides exchanged looks. Some scribbled timelines. Others quietly notified legal teams. The machine was turning, and DeSantis was now stuck inside it. He didn't look at Jasmine, because he knew. She was still looking at him, and in that gaze the reckoning had only just begun. The vote was cast, the chamber subdued, but what came next would leave a scar across the conscience of a nation. The overhead monitors didn't power down as usual. Instead, one of them flickered, then lit up with a slideshow titled Witness Families, Supplementary Exhibit A. No narration, no sound, just faces, dozens of them, then hundreds. Row after row of family portraits, grandfathers in wheelchairs, mothers in ICU beds, young daughters holding photos of their late parents. All real, all gone, not from war, not from accident, from policy. The screen rotated to a mother holding a folded American flag over a wooden box, her son's Navy photo in the background. Then a daughter clutching the last voicemail her father left before being intubated. Jasmine didn't look away. No one did. No one could. The silence that swept over the room wasn't procedural, it was spiritual. The kind of silence that only grief can enforce. A title card flashed in red. Cause of death on certificate, diabetes. Actual cause, COVID-19, then another. Cause of death, heart failure. Actual, COVID pneumonia, uncounted, and another. Cause of death, COPD. Actual, no ICU bed available. Some covered their mouths, others wiped their eyes. One lawmaker finally stood and left the room, quietly, visibly shaken. And DeSantis? He didn't lift his head. His hands gripped the edge of the table as if he were still trying to hold something together. But it was already gone. Jasmine remained seated, her body still, her breathing controlled. But her eyes, they burned. Not with rage, not even with triumph, but with something far more enduring. Purpose. This wasn't justice, not yet. But it was a beginning, a line in the sand between truth and the machinery that had buried it. Then the final screen appeared. White letters on a black background. Jasmine had submitted it as a closing note, to be displayed only if the chamber chose to accept her report. They did. The words read, "Freedom cannot be defined by the deaths of thousands. Politics must never stand above truth and human life." Gasps, then stillness again. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a campaign line. It was a knife in the gut of everything that had just been exposed. A single truth that no spin could undo. Across the country, viewers watching the hearing live on C-SPAN and news networks across every channel sat frozen. Some in tears, some in disbelief, and some, many, finally angry. That sentence would be quoted on the floor of Congress. It would appear on the front page of the New York Times, the Miami Herald, and the Guardian. It would be etched on protest signs, whispered at memorials, tattooed into the political soul of the country. But inside that chamber, where the ceiling suddenly felt lower and the light more unforgiving, the moment belonged to her. Jasmine stood slowly. Her chair creaked back as she rose, not with force but with quiet certainty. She didn't look at DeSantis as she passed him. She didn't have to. He felt it. The weight, the loss, the shame. His campaign advisors scribbled frantic notes, but it was already too late. The reckoning wasn't coming. It had arrived. As Jasmine walked down the center aisle of the hearing room, camera crews scrambled to follow. But she didn't glance at a single one. She wasn't walking for them. She was walking for the 200 names in that folder. For the mother who never got to say goodbye. For the nurse who was told to falsify death certificates. For the father whose ventilator was never plugged in because the state didn't want the optics. She passed aides, staffers, congressmen, every one of them silent, heads turning as if instinctively drawn to her like gravity. The sound of her heels against the floor echoed louder than any gavel that day. And as she reached the double doors at the back of the chamber, she stopped. She turned her head just enough so the microphone could still catch her voice. And with one final sentence, spoken not to the room, but to the country, she burned it into the national memory. "Who will rise," she said, "when human lives are turned into political strategy?" Then she walked out. No applause, no cheers. Just stunned, reverent silence. That question would hang in the air for weeks. It would headline op-eds, spark heated roundtables, and be quoted by protesters outside the Florida State Capitol. But inside the hearing room, it wasn't a question, it was a dare. And no one had the courage to answer it, not yet. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, as if the nation itself was in mourning. Jasmine didn't stop. She walked past the press line, past the security barrier, past the parked motorcades. Someone called her name. Another shouted a question. She said nothing, because the work wasn't over, and she didn't need a podium to be heard anymore. She had become something else, a mirror, a reflection of what happens when the truth is too loud to bury, a reminder that even in the most powerful rooms in America, silence can still shatter thrones. And in the days that followed, the image of her standing alone before the committee, voice clear, eyes fierce, would become the symbol of a single, unshakable question. Who will rise when human lives are turned into political strategy? And in that image, the country finally saw the answer, because someone already had. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.